look, obviously, I think both staffs felt like we got a lot of good work done. There were some similar situations maybe that we saw from a week ago, and then there were some things that we did differently. I thought both teams were outstanding, just relative to the tempo, the communication. I can't think, it's probably my 12th joint practice, but one of the better ones. There's going to be, like I said a week ago, a lot of tape, a lot of good things, a lot of things we got to clean up. And, but, you know, that's how you get better. So overall, I was pleased with it. I know Jonathan was as well. It was good to see Mr. Bidwell. When I was in college, I was a ball boy for this team. Some of you are too young to remember that they used to be the St. Louis Cardinals, but they trained at Eastern Illinois. I handed out rosters, and Mike Bidwell was, I think I was 18, he was 17, Joe Buck was running around 15, and we were just football brats. And but it was good, good to see a different group, a different front defensively than last week, maybe a little bit more similar to ours. And then, of course, the other side of the field, you know, I've got to go watch. And any questions?
Coach, any update on Garrett Bowles?
Yeah, so he's going to be fine. He had some asthma, some breathing, so we just pulled him out. He'll be okay.
Coach, what's the biggest key to getting a little bit more consistent in the run game? I know it's not where you guys.
Well, here's the thing. All right, you ready? You haven't seen it yet because in every drill, there's an early whistle. We stay up on the backs. You know, you saw a little last week, right? When it's tackle, you'll see more. I would say we're much further along just in the looks. So it's hard to appreciate when you're working a thud-up, touch-up tempo. What's really hard is being the coach of the drill saying 2nd and 7 or 2nd and, you know, it's hard to, you know, to kind of spot the ball when it's not tackled. But I think you'll see it. We've seen it.
I know you give us a hard time about charting stuff with quarterbacks, but to see the offense in that kind of rhythm today, is that encouraging as you're kind of in the midway of before?
There's an ebb and flow. Look, man, there's still a number of things split-wise, detail-wise that I know we'll watch it together, like as a group, and it's all relative, right? It's relative to what's the comparison, all right? And we can reference. You ready? We can reference what 2013, Payton, 2014. You know, they broke like a lot of. So what are we referencing? You know what? And we aspire to, and so it's all relative that way. But I think on both sides of the field, look, I'll ask. You know, I asked our defensive coaches. They felt we got off to a slow start over there. That on that field they had some explosives and guys running open. So we got to get that cleaned up. And you get some of these new route combinations. Look, you don't spend 7 days on a game plan. You're trying to play your technique. The key is, you know, we stayed healthy. I think we had a hamstring, Burton. I think we talked about Bolsey. I think we had another hamstring, one of our corners. But overall, I think both teams came out of it healthy. And then, you know, when you're out west, which I haven't been, and when you're trying to look at the ideal preseason games, you know, you look at, all right, non-division, closest, you know, without a lot of travel, you know, Arizona makes sense, San Francisco, the Rams, you know, and so we talked about, you know, again, next year, you don't want to travel 3.5 hours for a preseason game. So it's a little easier when you're further east because there's just more teams there. What else?
Your experience with quarterbacks for a couple decades here, do you believe this in the second round? It sounds like a real. So last week was what was it called? The second year?
Sophomore jinx.
It was a sophomore jinx. And I challenged, and I meant that respectively. haven't been able to find that first round, real good season, maybe the team. So I think that's a little bit cliche. I would say, look, the second year climb probably realistically happens more. The other is like Bigfoot. It makes for a good question, but give me the three that we're referencing. Now, I'm not talking about the one-hit wonders that are veterans in our league that had a year. You guys don't remember Don Mikowski. There's a few of these quarterbacks that just had this year, and then they kind of went away. And that was I compared it to one of those 80s video bands.
Rick Meyer did it, but Seattle.
Yeah, and there's a handful of those, man, that 1 year.
Right.
And so, but I do believe in experience, and I believe when you have a good football player who's had a year of experience, especially at that position, who's you build confidence through demonstrated ability. You can wish for it, but I actually have to do it. Then I think there can be, and a lot goes on around them. So that's important. And we talk all the time about painting the perfect picture for the Q. In order to get the best out of that position, are the splits correct, the depth of the routes correct, the run. When all the stuff around them is on point, you're going to get the best, cleanest evaluation of that player. And you guys see it in the preseason. Maybe there's a real good quarterback goes in, but he's with the second group and they're having trouble blocking the one end. And so it's hard to get an evaluation of the QB because he's kind of a reflection. It's not like a pitcher in baseball that can just go in there and throw his stuff. So, but we're looking forward to that. And more importantly, it's the others around him. I tell this story. I can't remember the year. We went out to L.A. and Drew injured his thumb. It was fractured, so he was going to be out 5 weeks. And it was a game in which we were flying right from L.A. to Seattle. And Teddy Bridgewater, who you guys know, was a tremendous leader. The players gravitated to him in a unique way. And in the meeting that Monday, start of the week, I said, look, I'm not worried about Teddy. I said, but what's happened, Drew's been here long enough where he's begun to make all the line calls. He's begun to remind the receivers, like he's taken over the kitchen entirely. And Teddy's going to point the mic out, but he's not going to make the Rip and Liz call. He's not going to. And so you guys are going to have to start boiling the water, turning the oven on, working on the desserts, and doing. And we won, and then we won, and then we won. We won 5 in a row. And I recall reaching out to Drew. He was with Elatrosh still. And I said, how are you doing? He said, I'm going well. I said, well, make sure you take your time. You don't have to hurry back. And he knew where I was going with that. And so the cast around the player has a lot to do with maximizing what that player can be. And we've all seen it in the draft. There's been, I don't know, probably a number of quarterbacks, if taken somewhere else, what's their career look like? And what happens so often is some of those early teams are picking there for a reason. And every year we see a version of a Ben Roethlisberger who was upset probably at the time of the draft, and yet it was a blessing. And then Aaron Rodgers, who went a little later, and then it kind of became a blessing. And so who ends up taking you can greatly impact your trajectory as to where you're going. And I believe that.
Coach, the first team offense had some pretty good success today. How much will that impact how much playing time you'll get?
So, fair question. I probably was going to get to this. I haven't done this before. I haven't had 2 joint practices before. So I'm not going to play. Neither Jonathan or myself are going to play the ones. Now, there'll be a few. Like, there's 5, 6 players that are on an 8-play pitch count. that we consider ones, but maybe lack of reps or for whatever reason. So we're going to feature really two phases, the twos. And when I say the twos, don't read into, basically there's going to be a group in the first half and a group in the second half, but your front line, O-line, D-line, QB, corner, I'm going to sit those guys only because of the uniqueness of two of these in a week's time frame. And then next week, I'm going to play those guys, 8 to 10 plays and get them out. So I kind of have a plan as to how they'll play in New Orleans, but that's what you can expect going into this game.
Sean, you mean the starters are going to play in the third preseason game?
Yeah.
8 to 10 plays?
Yeah.
Sean, with all the emphasis that you put on situational football, how young players coming into the league, how's their football IQ change over the years, over the decades, compared to when you first got in?
I think the premium on their learning has greatly changed. There was an old saying in the 70s, early 80s, the further away from the ball you were, the more tolerant we could be for your football IQ. The closer to the ball, you had to be smarter, the center, the Mike linebacker, the QB. And then, but I would say in today's game, I think that, I can't tell you the year, but I think it's been on a steady incline.
Coach, how valuable has Courtland Sutton's leadership been to young wide receivers like Short?
Extremely. And there's two ways vocally, like I can turn to Courtland. Last week we had a few plays where if you're the inside receiver in the slot, we say you control the flight deck on or off. And we had some penalties, two guys on, or we weren't, and I just turned and yelled at Sutton. I said, you get that fixed. And now Kerry Colbert knows if I'm yelling at Sutton, I'm yelling at him as well. But Courtland, it got handled this week. But then on top of that, he's out here. There's all the elements, the work ethic, the production, and how he lives his life, and then how he handles this game. One of the challenges always in free agency is you can't pay everyone, but you want to make sure you're paying makeup and character, because the contract, none of that will impact just how he practices and how he approaches the game. And it's really beneficial for us as an offense. Go ahead.
Marvin Williams was saying a couple of weeks ago, it's not talked about enough, the depth you have at receiver. What do you think about the depth and how it was on display today?
No, I like it. And look, there'll be some tough decisions. There's a chance a receiver that might be out here today might be on a 53 somewhere else, and so it's a good thing, and we're deep at running back. We're just further along. We're so much further along as a roster, and that elevates quite naturally the play of everyone.
With Nate Atkins,
Yeah, so we did a tightrope with Nate. We went back and forth. He had an ankle sprain. The benefit of the tightrope is it gives you a firm timeline, a consistent recovery. I don't want to give you a timeline on it, but he's going to miss some early portion of the season. That was done successfully, clean. There weren't any other things that they noticed, and it was a smart decision. That's a relatively new procedure, if I said within the last 15 years. And the benefit of it is the predictability, and you don't want to have a procedure done and then, we don't know when it's going to be back. And so from a medical standpoint, it's relatively new and effective. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. ESPN South Boulder made a bold prediction about the Broncos, saying, quote, Nix will lose his starting job during the 2027 season, which will be his last as a Bronco. What are your initial thoughts? I
didn't see that. And my initial thoughts are like 2027 seems like an eternity from now, you know, and so I think that's one of the challenges maybe with the media landscape, that, you know, it's going to draw clicks and everything, but I can't worry about Nick from ESPN, and I can't worry about 2027, but I can focus on this year, and but let's find him in 2027 and see where we're at.
In your roster discussions, Sean, do you talk about possibly keeping 4 tailbacks?
Yes. Yeah, we talk about the third QB, the fourth tailback. We talk about, you know, do you get to the game with 6 receivers? We talk like there are all these, and special teams factor in quite a bit, you know, and so, you know, there's the, let's say, the standard depth and then the exceptions. And because ultimately, I've said this, the right 53 is so important. And so that doesn't mean we have to constantly follow the model of what we've always done if the fourth tailback is better than the, you know, it's so we do go through all of that. And George and I, in fact, yesterday went through the next 10-day schedule. You know, 12 days, 13 days, we're at the cut down. And then we're signing practice squad players. And so it's all part of the equation. And I would say every year is a little different. It's just a little different than like any year before. It's just a little different. It might be because of one guy who plays special teams. It's just every year is a little different. And I was taught at a young age the most significant thing is the right 53. And so that's what keeps you up at night, making sure, you know, we're finding that group.
You brought it up.
Go ahead. And then
At right 53, you often talked about how you don't want to look in a year or so and see, oh, I let that talent out of the building.
And over the years, you know, when you do it long enough, there at some point that there's going to be, you just don't want to have 8. You know, I've told the story about Ninkovich, you know, and we didn't have a clean, you know, when you draft someone, it's so important to hear everyone. I want to hear everyone talk about the vision. We didn't do a good enough job about the vision. And we were an even front team. And, you know, here I am telling him I think he's going to be an NFL long snapper. And 2 years later, he's winning back-to-back Super Bowls starting as an edge player for New England. So we didn't do a good enough job starting with me relative to the vision, the fit. And I love him. You know, he's been here now to help us. And we've had a fullback. And now it's different if it's a free agent and you just can't, you make the decision. It's those younger players. And you hope that when your career's finished, that's a single digit, one hand, not including the thumb count, you know, like you're just, but it, you know, it happens.
Since you touched upon it, what's your view on possibly keeping 3 quarterbacks on the 53?
It's a topic, meaning.
It's tough to get Sam through on the practice squad.
Well, that gets discussed as well. So when we discuss these, we try to, how many players last year were claimed at quarterback? How many players were claimed as later round? We get these percentages to help us predict. You know, we felt like Jaleel 2 years ago was going to be a practice squad player, and then in San Francisco, I think he has 120 some yards, and it's like, well, there goes the, you know. So we discuss those risks, and it for long hours. Like you're right on it. Like we discussed that.
Sean, you got a lot of questions about Nick Bonito's, you know, where he's at in his contract. Does his absence have anything to do with
No, I'm going to real quick with Nick. He had a little spur on the top of his foot. All right. Now I had 2 spurs removed on my big toe, and that hurt like you know what. And so I'm still recovering. It's better. His is something that we just had done, and we knew that he was going to miss this week. He'll be up and at it next week. So he's been fantastic. His miss, the days he's missed, has been this simple bone spur in a unique spot on the top of the foot. It's not weight bearing. He went ahead and had it done. I think 3 stitches. The goal would be to have him back at practice next week, getting some work against New Orleans.
Tyler Badie was out there in 2 minute again. I believe that was the case last week in Santa Clara. What kind of trust is he earning here?
So let's just talk specifically about him. He's someone who's got really good football IQ. He's a little bit more experienced. He's been here, but that doesn't equate to anything. But he's good in the protections. You know, when the fronts move around, he's a good receiver. And so, you know, you start looking at Badie, and then you start looking at, you know, Blake, and then Jaleel. You guys can do the math Audric is and hopefully day after tomorrow, we're getting a ton of more exposure. That's one of those position groups of like, hey, let's find the argument for Tyler. Let's find the argument for Audric. Let's find it for Jaleel, and you're rooting for all of them, you know. And so you're seeing some of the things that he does well. He can play in the 2 minute, and I think that, look, we activated him late in the year in a playoff game. You know, there's some savviness to his game before he got hurt. You know, before we got here, he had a little bit of success, and so I like the player. I mean, I like coaching him.
Sean, Riz said that the 3 preseason games. Rizzy said the 3 preseason games are the worst for all 32 special teams coaches every year because you guys in and out, and you don't know who's up. You know.
I think in general, preseason is difficult in special teams because you might be off of a group on offense or defense, and what we've always tried to do is split the special teams into phase 1 and phase 2, first half, second half. So you could be a starting right guard, and you're off, but the 2 score a touchdown, you're on field goal, and tough, you know. And so I think it's been, that's as long as I've been in this league. You know, last week we saw a late run on, you know, and you want to be clean in your operation, but it's harder when you got more moving parts.
No, and I just want to go back to that for a second.
Bonito?
Yeah, he was going to try and play through it.
Yeah, it was something he noticed last week. And have you ever seen him? You know, he's got really good edge power, and so he's got bend. And, you know, these deposits kind of grow where there's, you know, where there's pressure. It's like your bone reacts to it and says more. So his was small. I think initially he was like, well, you know, will it be just a day or two? And I think the feeling with our foot and ankle specialist is like, yeah, but you're not gonna. This isn't something that you locally shoot, or, you know. He said, Nick, this is so easy to remove, and then not have to deal with it on Monday, you know, every other week. And then, all right, what's the downside? You know, when you say 3.5, 4 days, maybe it's 5 days since. It just made a lot of sense.
Just go back to the running backs for a second, and I don't mean to.
That's right.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
I won't be.
When it comes to the running backs and the evaluation, if you were like looking at like a old school like pie chart, and I know you don't want to minimize any part of the process, but in the evaluation of the running backs, what percentage is standard training camp, joint practice, game?
I think it's a sum total. It's a great question, and you know, the OTAs give you mental alerts, receiving alerts, but I said this to you all, and here's the deal. You're right where I'm at, and we don't know yet. And if you recall at the start of training camp, I said we're all going to know, and I hopefully am going to be right, but we all don't know, and it's still a very competitive spot, and so certainly if the drill is a drill where you can be tackled, that elevates a little bit the running back position, because it's hard to measure some of the gains out here. So the games factor in a little bit more when you're able to break a tackle or that type of thing. And then look, is if it's really close, is there one that does something better in the kicking game? But obviously, all right, and you guys have asked the right questions. We're not there yet. But the good news is we still have 10, 11 days, and hopefully we can get there, and we'll all know.
For the running game, the big picture, you've talked about the whole thing with the blocking really being kind of 4 weeks into the season until.
No, I think this with the running game, look, it's going to be different. When we went through the cut-ups and watched the offensive line and we just felt like, man, there's other teams. That player is the spaghetti sauce sometimes. There's a safety that's down in the box, and so we've immediately upgraded that position. We brought in leadership with J.K. and we drafted Harvey early, and so you're going to see a difference. And hopefully a markedly different running game. And it's not always going to be perfect, but that's the magic of the good back. There's been a lot of great runs where, maybe the looks weren't as clean, and it was the ability. When we watch tape, sometimes we say the play or we say the player. And so as coaches, we're trying to give them as many plays, like good, clean, and yet there's times where it's the player. And I think that we're going to be further along there.
Sean, where you just depth-wise on your offensive line behind your starting group? How do you feel about that? And a couple of the young
Good. And there'll be a few tough decisions there, but good. Man, you're going to see that unit a lot Saturday night, and when that second unit came in the other night, they were really good.
What's the main message you have going into Saturday's matchup? Sorry, generic question, but TBD.
No, it's number one, and cleaning up and progress from mistakes that we've seen already. Are those getting cleaned up, or is it Groundhog Day all over again for some players? And if that's the case, then we have a problem. So, cleaning up some of the prior mistakes, the operation, and then just, watching these guys, perform at home. It'd be nice. Obviously, we have one home preseason game for our fans, and I think, look, you're going to see a similar strategy with Jonathan and his team. So those are invaluable snaps. But to your question, most importantly is more information, more data that can help us to the right decisions.
John, over the next few weeks, what is kind of the plan for Dre Greenlaw? Do you trust him that you?
Yeah, and he's doing well. In other words, there's some scarring, there's some scar tissue, and we're going to see his pitch count now. You're going to see him more next week, and look, he's chomping at the bit, and it'll be important for him to get some padded work in. Next week, because of the 2 back-to-back joint practices, it kind of alters a little bit your schedule. We'll get into a normal, we're practicing Sunday. And when you think about it, you say you're practicing after a game. Well, 40 guys didn't play in the game. All right, they got work today. Yesterday we were in and out, on and off. So you'll see a practice Sunday. Monday they'll be off. And then, Tuesday pads, Wednesday pads, Thursday pads. I don't want to hear any complaining. Friday we'll fly to New Orleans, and then get ready to, get good work in with the Saints, and then we come back and have another Sunday practice. Monday cut down comes Tuesday, Wednesday. Fortunately, that feels like a long ways away because there's a lot we have to do prior to then.
When the league had that incident, unfortunately, in Park Avenue, they've called for increased security around teams. We see armed officers walking around.
I would say this, and it's a great question. When I want you to take this the right way. When I arrived here, there's always like things that are different, but man, like 1 through 10, security here when I arrived here was unreal. Like the amount, 10 different people, front of the building, cameras. Like honestly, if you had a flight that landed at 4:30 in the morning and you left your briefcase in your office, I could come here and there's someone at the front desk, there's cameras at the back desk, and it's I would say, I love when they use that term, best in class, right? That's kind of the new best in class. All right. But like I've been others where, there's your one guy that leaves at 7 and so it's not uniform. And I would say when those protocols come out, I'm willing to suggest, there'll be a change or two, but I'm going to say we're way further along than most. I mean, just on the road, where you're at, in the hotel, it's impressive. And I don't think that just came with Greg and Kerry and the Walton Penner group. I just think Denver's been ahead of the game that way. And I've talked to Mickey in New Orleans, where the crime rate's different and there's some days you're working late in the office and when you leave, you realize you were the last one out.
So you have to practice hanging out with Kyler Murray, Peyton Manning, not asking you what was said in those conversations.
No, just, it's funny because you evaluate them. Kyler's from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. My son, they're, 4 years difference, but, Connor, who went to TCU, watched him play his high school games. I remember meeting his parents at a sandwich shop at the Combine. And then this is the answer you hate to hear when I say how many years, and then he tells you, and you're like, Or Jacoby Brissett, who I worked out, and he was. You spend so much time studying these guys in the draft, and it always ages you when they tell you how many years, because it doesn't seem that long. But yeah, I'm going to see that side of the ball and take a peek and see if we can see some good ideas, some stuff they're doing. What else?
Sean, what kind of a test was it to go against Trey McBride, and what did you learn about your defense from that kind of a matchup?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a joker, right? And so when you get paid, those players become more difficult than the blue chip receiver out here that we can lean to, double. It's just a little bit harder. And then when you're not putting any game plan in, in other words, you're spending, a night and a half with what you can appreciate then a player like that. They're so quarterback friendly because they're just closer to the position. The halfback, that's an elite receiver, the tight end, those guys are really a quarterback's friend. And so I'm anxious to watch because we didn't really have a lot of any crossover tape. We played him in the preseason last year. Zach had an unbelievable game, Wilson, but I'm anxious to watch that other side of the ball and watch and appreciate maybe what you guys saw and how he's playing. But when you get one, they're hard to find. They're valuable.
I've got one on DeAndre Tillman. What's your take on just a guy, Division II, 3 years in the spring league, and the way he's just burst up in the last year or so?
I think that the message we always try to deliver is, the process of the draft and then signing the players after the draft and then signing free agents, scouting the Canadian League, the other league. there's a rhyme and a reason to make decisions in to get your best group. But we always tell them once they're here, how they arrived is of no importance to us. And we're able to show that over a long timeline. Our locker room counts on us keeping and playing the best players. And so, look, it's a perfect opportunity. Yep, I'm aware of where you came from, and I'm ready for another good story. Our league is filled with. We had a returner in New Orleans that never played high school or college football. And do you guys remember the days where they would literally have an open tryout? Guys would show up in blue jeans, and coaches would be patient enough. We'd time them in 40s, and this Michael Lewis shows up. Now he's working 2 doors down at the Budweiser factory and runs one of these 40s that everyone looks at their watch, and you're only supposed to run one. And then they said, Mike, would you run another one for us? And sure enough, he goes and runs another one. And then, all right, we're going to invite you to. And then he comes, and then he's at training camp, and then he makes the 53, and a few years later, he's the Pro Bowl punt returner. Now, that's a movie, Beer Man. All right, that's a lot better than the Vince Papale whatever story.
Didn't Disney tell that story?
Beer Man. Every time I'd see him in the hallway, I said, I want the rights. And he played for me.
Yeah.
And he works still for the same. But it's an amazing story. And I tell the story because it's better. It was dark, airline drive. He made the wrong right-hand turn instead of the Budweiser. 2 doors down is the Saints. But that's pretty amazing. And so we're rooting for them all.